I'm Michele Peterson. This is Frankly Speaking series in podcast land, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We are late this week, the week of June, what was Monday, June 20th?
20th.
So today is Friday, June 25th. Do we have that?
Today's 24th.
Today's 24th. This is Carlos Hampton.
19th, Monday.
Oh, the 19th was Monday?
Today's the 24th, right?
I don't know, it's Friday.
And this is Andy Sweet. So if you're listening for the first time, we're all over here in East Chattanooga talking into these microphones. That was odd for me at first, but now that we're on our third one, I'm kind of getting used to it. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of like it's starting to feel like a little bit like...
like a production.
Feels natural.
It does. It does feel more natural as you do something different, you know, because I've never really talked in a microphone. Have either one of you all talked into a microphone? Or I guess you have more than anybody.
Yep, fair bit.
Yeah, that was Andy I was talking to. So I guess today we just follow up with the discussion last week, following up to the discussion before where we really didn't talk about anything. But we are in East Chattanooga because we care deeply about the city of Chattanooga. And one of the things that we're trying to do is implement a podcast environment here at Archway. So what I did as an entrepreneur and someone who owns my own business, I own a home elevator business, a national home elevator business, is instead of going out and funding a whole bunch of stuff, I decided to fund a building by buying it and making it the arena of new and more progressive thought in how to look at things. And one of the things that I think I specialize in is being able to look at certain macro environments where if you're a kid and you're listening to this, a macro environment on the economic side is when everything kind of looks the same. And it's easier for people. They do things the same way. They get their systems down, and then everybody just kind of funnels in and does the same thing versus a microeconomic environment like what I'm in. So when I started my home elevator business, it was based on the fact that there was a larger, more corporate environment, and the corporate people didn't care. They were the whale, right? The last time we talked about this, the fish swimming next to the well. Then I think the beautiful thing about my business has been that no one has really known that I'm swimming next to them as I go into these communities, because I dip in and out of communities all over the country and sell home elevators to all kinds of people. And I bring a lot of value to those consumers in those marketplaces. For example, in Massachusetts, a standard residential elevator probably costs you $35,000 or $40,000. When I dip into those communities, I can do it by traveling labor from Georgia or Tennessee, and I can usually save about, $10,000 per elevator in the state of Massachusetts for consumers in Massachusetts. Same can be held true for New York, Rhode Island. I cannot do business in the state of Connecticut. It is totally locked down. The barrier to entry is tied to 10 years or more of union type of labor, so the license there is almost unattainable. And a cost of a residential elevator in the state of Connecticut is $50,000.
Wow.
Holy cow.
An elevator that next door in the state of New Hampshire or in New York would only cost $25,000.
Wow.
And that's because...
Time to bootleg elevators in Connecticut.
Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, I've heard stories about how the police have escorted elevator guys who have attempted to go tap into that well out to the Connecticut line. And I think that what you have to realize is that a lot of that happens somewhere where the marketplace decides to be governed, and then they begin to collude to keep the governance is basically the part of it that keeps people from entering the marketplace, and then you can see that in the price of a product based on the fact that there's not enough people doing this. Or you can go the other side of things, which is what we're facing right now, because Andy and I and Carlos are sitting here talking into microphones to try to get young people in East Chattanooga to listen to us, is there's certainly an oversaturation of message when it comes to YouTube, even SoundCloud, Vimeo, all the platforms. Those platforms, in my opinion, are oversaturated. Because how is anybody going to find us unless we start to advertise this and pay thousands of dollars to get people who have no real value in the reality of what they see us bringing to them, because it's going to happen slowly. You know, what we're trying to talk about here.
Minus, the ability of things that can go viral, which has an odd connotation when you say viral, but it doesn't take something big or extreme or wow factor to go viral. It's the idea of, what we see happening on Facebook, where someone posts something and then they share it to their friends, and it all of a sudden is exposed to thousands and thousands. It's all a matter of what I constantly go back to is content, right? Are we discussing things that has a place in the market, in these maybe saturated platforms, that all of a sudden when people hear it, they go, well, that's different content that we haven't heard. We want to hear more of it. So I will argue, I think that it's saturated with the same thing, but the minute you offer something different, the beauty of those platforms are sky's the limit. Right.
Yeah, the sky's the limit with different communities, certainly, because YouTube is a global community. But again, I would argue that the message that we're trying to bring home over here in East Chattanooga, and I will continue to say this if we do 100 of these, is there is an incredible economic opportunity over here with the people that live here. And the fact that they cannot see that is something that I'm trying to bring the spectacles and the glasses and hopefully the telescope to get them to understand that there's property over here that can be purchased for very little money. That property then can be utilized in such a way that the first thing, it houses people and it houses a community of people. If you're someone that's living within a region that you don't want your kids to exposed to something else, but you're not giving yourself as a parent or a grandparent or anything else credit that you can keep your kids safe. I don't know that you can keep your kids safe from anything anymore. So I run from the gamut of showing your kids how to do things and then allowing them organically to try to figure out themselves how to stay safe, because you've given them the tools to stay safe.
Yeah, and I think, what you're talking about and what we're talking about can be seen nationwide, worldwide, right? Everyone has the community that has the same problem that we're discussing here locally in Chattanooga. And it's a matter of bringing that to the forefront and saying, hey, it's time to reinvest in the areas that can be, should be, and ultimately could be very amazing things could happen. Those little niches are everywhere. And so as we talk here, right, it's not just here, it's everywhere.
It is everywhere. I mean, the bottom line is the marketplace is a very difficult place to be in right now. And I got lucky because I recognized home elevators was a market that I could learn in my 20s and make all the mistakes and do all the things that I did. And then I could evolve in my 30s to understand what I did wrong in my 20s. And by the time I got to my 40s, I could really make a large amount of money by simply having all of the mistakes and successes and come up with a formula. And I tell kids all the time, the reason why you take algebra is not to memorize whatever formula is up there, it's to write your own formula and then spit something out that equals what you're looking for when you give yourself a goal. And I think we touched on how Carlos was able to remember, and it sounds like I really want to get back to that conversation about how you were able to become battalion chief with the first time the city opened that up to not how long you had been with the force or how many people you knew. And I mean, we can also, probably assume that the older guys, they work their way up by shaking hands and doing all the politicking and all the stuff.
In past years, that wasn't always that uncommon. Birmingham, well, Jefferson County, in the Birmingham area, because of all of the corrupt things that were going on with the fire department, the sheriff's department, and so on and so forth, they instituted a personnel board that filters through employees and promotions and so on and so forth to keep people from getting those back table or back door handshakes or those favors or whatever for promotions and whatnot. And it's a really interesting thing, an interesting story. It said the sheriff was making like 6 figures on favors, getting hired and getting promoted and so on and so forth. It's crazy.
Well, and I think that's been the biggest issue that I think exists with the NCAA. You know, the overseers, they're this centralized regulatory body that's private. They were created because there was so much happening in the arena of, you know, gambling and all the things that happened at the turn of the century when it came to sports, and how much people were trying to do to get a leg up, because everybody was poor back then, right? I mean, pretty much at the turn of the century, everybody in this country was poor, with an exception of a select few landowners and other people that, and then you see that industry and that industrialization start to turn. You know, it's funny, PBS ran a special called The Buccaneers, and it had to do with the fact that these girls that were born from these industrial barons, people who were in the steel business, and they were looking for titles. And so they would send their women over to marry the gentry or the landowners in England. And if you ever get a chance to look at that, and you can really make it through the conversation, it's a fascinating study about, you know, caste systems and class and all the things that titles bring. You know, like one would say that that's why you see all these rich men, maybe Bob Corker's one of them, maybe Haslam's one of them. They are looking to be called governor or senator or congressman, because that validates them, right? It's why I think Donald Trump is running for office right now, because somehow he went out and acted a fool on NBC and did certain things that people would laugh at. And he decided, okay, I'm going to show you the conditions in which we live in by going down into the muck and basically saying some of the most asinine, ridiculous things about women and immigrants and black people and everything else. Now he's like insulted gay people. And I get what he's trying to do, which is he's trying to basically put himself in a position to make a deal. So I have a bet right now, and I'm going to get it on record with my brother, that baton will be passed as of July 30th in Cleveland, Ohio. He will actually not run for office. He will pass that baton. I think I know who it's going to be with, but I'm okay with being wrong. So the funny thing is that I have this sense that someone else after July 30th in Cleveland is going to come out of there as the Republican nominee, because all he's looking for is respect, right? And the respect comes with the title, but if he showed that he could get the title without actually having to show his taxes and do all the things that we've talked about in private, I mean, that guy's never going to show his taxes.
Not going to happen.
I think it's a big circus. I think the whole thing's a big circus. I've been posting on my Facebook page the old Monty Brewster from Brewster's Millions, vote none of the above, because I just think it's just a big clown show right now on both sides.
Which is petrifying and sad.
It's scary.
Well, and here's what Donald Trump knows. I mean, Donald Trump knows that our markets, including all of our institutional markets like Wall Street, and, you know, they have become less about risk and reward and more about the transactions. So John Oliver tapped into this last week, and I like John Oliver. He can be a little crass for some of the taste, but I mean, basically, if you look at these financial transaction fees, and what would be interesting, Carlos, is looking at, you know, your pensions at the fire department, because there's a huge density of people paying into retirement at the fire department. This is what I can tell, at least, and you can set me straight, that there's a large contingency of people working daily and weekly and monthly and so on and so forth for that ability to have a benefit. So we've touched on this over and time again, and I touched on it on Frankly Speaking last week, that a lady asked me to help her son find a job. I said, I'm not going to help your son find a job. I'll help him find an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing that someone like you brings to the table that I've never existed in is you do have limitations within your economic environment that are then being managed by other people that you don't. Do you know, or do most firemen get a prospectus on where all the money is going that you are setting aside for retirement to be invested to get a return so that it compounds interest? Do you know when you pay the end of that and that pension, who's managing that?
There's a board that that supposedly oversees how the funds are, I guess, broken down or whatever. But most firefighters in their early years don't pay attention to it, usually until they get about 15 years in, and they find themselves on the downside of the career, and it's starting to be more relevant to them. When it's encouraged to pay attention to it early, so that you have a better understanding and you're not cramming those last few years trying to catch up with how everything shifted and gone back and forth.
Because as a socialized group, you know, you guys have millions of dollars pooled together for the common good of your retirements that's going to basically continue to feed one another. Is there a certain point where that gets upside down, that an overpromise has been made to the older guys, and then the person who is, you know, regulating that, which could possibly be the mayor? I don't know enough about this, but I'm fascinated by the fact that there are probably millions and millions of dollars, pools of money in these civil servants, you know, that go together. And I would be fascinated to see, if you broke that down, what investments are being made with that money to recoup. Because I said the same thing last week about teachers. I mean, you've got an abundance of teachers being invested in, certainly by property owners like me, because if you look at my property taxes here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, they break it down as to how much goes to education, which I love that. And I think that's why, you know, getting involved with the school board and how, but the less landowners that we have and the more tenants that begin to happen, I wonder if there's a certain exploitation that begins to happen with all of that money.
Well, I wouldn't say all of it, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of it was probably not on the up and up, or not squared away to the firefighters or the policemen's benefit. In 2008, like with most people, our pension took a hit. And with that, some change did come. There was a 3%, automatic 3% raise for retirees. And I think around 2010, maybe 11, they voted against that, to where if it was performing at a certain level, they would get the raise. But if it wasn't, then they would not. To where before it was like automatic, 3% every year.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. Is there a private market, though, for a firefighter that has so much experience as you do, to be able, because this is the thing that I'm fascinated about when it comes to your organization and your business model from a totally civil servant perspective, is, you know, we have all these countries that have no regulatory bodies and really no governance to speak of when it comes to social good that we do business with every day. And I just wonder if there's ever a time where somebody who's been a firefighter in New York can monetize his knowledge based on codes and other things that keeps people safer. Does he fly or she fly? I don't think there are many females, to be honest with you, but I mean, I'll go ahead and say that. Does he fly over to China or to other places? It'd be fascinating to find out if that guy can go make money on what he knows and has experienced.
They've actually had firefighters go over to Afghanistan or Iraq. Firefighters and truck drivers go over there to make money hand over fist, but there's more liability in it because it's
yeah, the risk is they could get killed.
Exactly, but they've hired truck drivers and firefighters and probably even some security operations or whatever to go over and make six figures to pretty much do what they're doing here for 5 figures.
Yeah, so my theory behind a lot of these lockdown markets, that especially up north, you see how locked down they are. They're intertwined with insurance. I mean, I hate to keep going back to this. I'm not beating the insurance guys up. But at the same point, I've never been sent an insurance bill or a declaration page that says, okay, the legislature made a change in the building code that's going to directly make people safer. That, therefore, the rate of occurrence that injury happens is less, so we don't need to charge you as much.
We're going to decrease your...
No, that's not going to happen.
Ever had that?
Now I'll tell you what did happen. When they had the tornadoes come through, that 1 year, it was like 3 or 4 of them that come through that 1 year. The following year, even though I hadn't filed a claim, my insurance went up. My home insurance went up because of all the claims in this area. And I thought that was
Tornado
amazing.
risk, tornado damage.
Yeah. I was like, but I've not filed a claim, but my insurance is going up. And I still can't understand it. But like you said, if something happened that they implemented a safer practice, or you had to have sprinklers in every building, or something happened.
Safer practices
to where you would get that discount. I've never seen that.
Well, actually, in your homeowner's insurance, there are, standard practices or safer practices, but I'm talking about in the code. Like when you look at people that write code for buildings and you look at the regulation that happens, if indeed the code and the way that they write the code is supposed to keep people safer, then one could argue that through the mechanism of governing and telling people like seat belts or other things, one would have thought that would decrease what we pay out in insurance. And like I said, I think if ever I was to run for office, I wouldn't run against Washington, because Washington has basically gotten so like it's either Social Security or military. I mean, there's very little, ancillary type spending that they do anymore, especially when they took out the earmarks and all the things that happen. And to me, I'm wondering what the guys are doing in Nashville, because they're mostly men, mostly white men. And it's not that I don't like white men, but I just I belong to a private club in town. I won't say who it is because I don't want to embarrass them. But I go there, and about every 3 times I go there, I'm like, man, we don't have any color around here.
Am I invited?
Yeah, of course you are. When you go with me, but I mean, I'm sure that we would get some looks, because it's like there's no color in town. I mean, it's like this is the part that until we get down to the genesis of this, which is separation and fear, and not an understanding of opportunity via all of us talking about this. It's the same thing that happened in Europe, and it's obviously the same thing that happened when the Brits went over to India, which is they created a caste system so that everybody knew. And this is the part of this that I think teachers, if we begin to talk to teachers about anything, because of the fact that we think that we're valid through sitting around at Archway talking about this, the one thing that we would say to them is, if you focus on anything, it's to focus on the fact that our system in which we live in has created a caste system through the English language, because it is the first thing that happens when you meet somebody. I'll give you an example. Somebody gave me a proposal for a $10,000 deal. And I won't tell you what, I think it was like PR or something. Yeah, it was PR, public relations, for a new business I was starting about 3 years ago. She came in very bright, very pretty, grew up outside of Cleveland, blonde. I mean, had everything going. I think she had like a perfect look about her. She sat down, and she sat down next to another young lady, and I said, how did you all meet? And she said, her and I went to high school together.
Ooh. Ouch.
And I said to myself, this person could never write a press release for me, because she doesn't know that she just used the basic fundamental part of the English language that tells me her class right then. It is an absolute caste system that was created to give people an indication of where you are from, because your colloquialisms of where you are, when you use that, will tell me whether or not I can trust you to do something that I'm asking you to do. The genesis of that had to start from the class system, because I still to this day cannot get anyone to answer why is it we can't end a sentence in a preposition.
To a point, I could agree with that, but then to another point, some people use methods like that to make the other person think they have the upper hand. The whole hillbilly slick deal, where they may be highly educated and just in their comfort zone or just caught off guard, they may revert back to that class or that dialect or whatever that they were used to talking in their surrounding.
I don't disagree. I mean, I'm not a dummy. I mean, I'm not going to go into a meeting full. I mean, it's going to be interesting if I ever get invited to speak somewhere like Kiwanis, right? They've not invited me thus far, and so the reality is they've not invited either one of you all, have they?
Nope. I turned it down.
Oh, you did turn it down?
Yeah, they probably wouldn't invite me.
I mean, I don't know what club would invite me at this point. I guess that's why I'm kind of trying to make my own clubhouse.
Let's do it.
But I think that's the reality is I've just never looked like other people, and so I can wade through the crowd and still feel special. And that's what I want these kids to feel like.
Well, I think there's a bunch of different levels of that. So certainly the English language has those separations where you're like, oh, you used that sentence. I know all about you now. Same thing as kind of dialect or accent, like if you've got the northern accent, the southern accent,
yeah,
right? People start to make assumptions immediately based on that. And how often, so that one I find even more interesting, right? If you're misusing the English language, that could clearly be assumed to have some association with your intelligence. But dialect, or if you have an accent, has nothing to do with intelligence. And yet I would say on the whole, like you hear someone with a thick southern drawl, everyone goes, oh, yeah. Probably not as intelligent as someone who has that non-accent
or that choppy New York.
Yeah, they could be using perfect English.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You're up in Johnson City and somebody says, Ewan's going to the Cracker Barrel tonight, or Ewan's going over here, and it doesn't affect me one way or the other, but I know the marketplace judges that. And so right now we're seeing something very fascinating that Google is doing that I don't know if I touched on this last time, I think is one of the more fascinating businesses I've ever looked at, which is these software guys have designed, and this Google just paid, I think literally, I'm almost spot on, $1.2 billion for this company. And what this company does is when someone speaks into a telephone or a monitor, it immediately takes what that person is saying and it monotones it. So the person on the other end doesn't know if that's a male or a female, if they're from India or from Africa or from Mexico, South America, as long as they are speaking English. And I bet you anything where it's headed is when they go off script and something doesn't equate within the mathematical code, it gets rid of that very quickly so that someone thinks they're talking to someone who is like them.
So what they've basically done is come up with a verbal text.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's one of the biggest flaws when it comes to texting is the emotion, the highs and lows, who
uses 5 exclamation points versus just a period.
Yes.
Anytime I've ever gotten into a discussion, or one might say, a little bit of a issue with somebody on Facebook or anything, I mean, I always cut and paste when to use an exclamation point, because that's where they always go, like 5 exclamation points like
They're driving it home.
they're just driving it home. And I'm like, this is when an exclamation point is necessary. Not when you're trying to get me to see your point of view and you aren't articulating it enough. And that's what I guess I'm saying. When I mentored those kids, one of the things that I really understood is that their parents spoke that way, or the people that they were with. So what I don't understand, it's kind of like I don't understand HVAC, heating and cooling, the way it's designed. It's just designed in this universal mechanism so that you have all these things working together. But one would argue if you live in Florida, you don't really need to have heat as much as you need to have the most effective air conditioning possible. But they still buy the same systems that the rest of us buy because it's owned by the same multi-billion-dollar corporations, that the best thing that works for them on their production line, on their factory floors, is to make it the same way regardless of where you live. And that's what I think is interesting about East Chattanooga, is they suffer from that mentality. So I would take the kids at Hardy, and what we may try to do here at Archway through the creative outlet of taking a product like a donut, and in that discussion, we may apply some of the rules that are happening in their English class or as they begin to get older, so that they fundamentally understand this is why you're learning this stuff. Because when they go home, if their parent or their guardian speaks in that, dialect or colloquialism, that's very difficult to break if they can't put A plus B equals C.
But that's what I'm saying.
That takes a strong kid to recognize that.
But that's what I'm saying. And now, there's I guess it's a black thing. It's called talking white when you're taking care of business. Mm-hmm. It's like sitting here talking now, whatever. We can just kind of chop it up, so to speak. But then say you're trying to get a job or you're trying to take care of a bill or something that's official. If you listen to a black woman talk, her whole pitch and everything else changes or whatever. We spoke before on some sales that you tried to make before and how you changed it to kind of draw the person in on another level versus what was really going on. And that tends to happen where everything's a class, just like you said. If you think that I sound a certain way or that I come from a certain side of town or area in the world, then you're going to give me a little bit more respect or less respect, depending on where that's coming from. So most people try to up who they are versus remaining where they are and being okay with that. They want to bring themselves to your level versus them bringing you to their level to understand where they're coming from.
Well, and Carlos, one could argue that I definitely enjoy the finer things of life when it comes to being served. I've gotten to a place in my life where we're making this joke, and I think we're pretty serious about us going, we are going to go and we're going to wait tables against one another.
I'm going to beat you.
And see if indeed, because I think so many people get to a place where they want to be served that they have to ask themselves, can they still serve? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's, my personal acumen on that side of things is you better be nice to the people on the way up because you're going to see them on the way back down.
Exactly.
And you see that with this class of people that are now beginning to turn 70 and 80. And I told a guy the other day, you're just one of those guys that you think everybody is a hammer. I mean, that you're the hammer and everybody's your nail. And I don't want to ever be that business person. Am I tough? Can I hold my own in negotiations? But my whole acumen, and we all three have this, including the fourth guy here who never speaks, which is Devin, is that we respect everybody. And I think that what we try to do together is we try to bring, because we got to really hone in on this donut thing in one of these discussions. And I thought it'd be great if the kids could hear how this works. Mm-hmm. So that if a kid is out there listening and he or she is like, what in the daylights are these people talking about? And then they go in their English class, because what I can't understand is why 1 through 6th grade in these elementary schools is just not spent on the English language. If everything can be broken down to your understanding that you cannot really move through our society unless you can read and articulate and have the spoken word. It's been proven time and time and time again that even a rapper who speaks all of those things in all of those ways can go out into a marketplace, create his own marketplace or her marketplace, and then at the end of the day, if he or she doesn't know how to read a contract and decipher what in that contract is being told that they can or cannot do, then they have to rely on somebody else to do that. And that relying on somebody else can be family that's going to take advantage of them. It can be a lawyer that's going to take advantage of them. And so I've always focused on understanding that it's in the written word. If someone understands the written word and how you can put certain things together, like a lawyer once said to me during a deposition, this is the way depositions work, Michele. Do you know the time? And by nature, when someone is asked a question, they want to answer it fully. And so he said, I want to know yes or no.
Because because what he's doing is guiding you to say what he wants you to say in front of the jury.
It's legal artistry. He is taking the spoken word and taking the emphasis out of it that I'm a kind person and I don't need to be asked literally, do you know the time today or do you know the exact time? He's phrasing it in such a way, and that's why I say until you learn that, and most people don't learn that, I guess, until they go to law school. But I learned that early on because I got sued at the age of 27 about 4 different times by the same guy who couldn't get a workers' comp claim done, and the lawyer that represented him. I still see this guy out to dinner all the time who sued me, and he knew that I didn't have any money. And he sued me because he couldn't get the insurance people to pay the claim because he couldn't get a doctor to say this guy got really hurt. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a system that told me when I gave this guy a job that he knew how the system ran. So this was like his 4th workers' comp suit.
No.
But if I was the person that I am, this guy was inarticulate. It was a 4%, I think it was less than 4% unemployment at that time in the mid-90s. And he was a large black man. Now, if I had been ignorant, like most of these people out here who talk about certain things that they don't know anything about what they're talking about because they're not big thinkers or outside the box thinkers, the reality is I would have never hired a large black man from that point forward. Because I would have assumed all black men, large, were like that. Because he sued me for loss of consortium, which means he couldn't have sex with his wife anymore because he got hit on the head, and that was my fault.
Which head?
Huh? And he sued me for a legal phrase called retaliatory discharge. I only know those 2 phrases because it happened to me. And I only now know that those aren't included in my legal retainage called workers' comp insurance. So when I called my workers' comp insurance guy, and I hope that there's a business person listening to this so they get this, he told me, you shouldn't have fired that guy while he was under a claim because your insurance doesn't cover my bill now.
Oh
man.
And I said, hold up one second, Willis. Tell me what you're talking about.
What you talking about, Willis?
And he said, the workers' comp insurance people know how often someone gets hurt and then another person who's running that company fires them because they can't work anymore. And most companies cannot run the balance of having someone on their payroll and taking up a slot. Mm-hmm. Even though they may not be paying payroll, the workers' comp insurance is meeting that gap, but yet they're still going to potentially come back into the business. That they know that they can go, or the lawyers on the other side know they can go around the workers' comp insurance claim that's going to move at a glacial pace, and they can sue that business owner for what's called retaliatory discharge. Now, at 27 years old, I knew those retaliatory discharge and loss of consortium. This is the point. If we live in an environment where kids fundamentally can't even understand the meaning behind not ending a sentence or preposition, how in the world do we ever expect them to live in that kind of microcosm in business?
Kind of funny related stories is in where I'm going with this is at what age or education level do you really learn that? Because my story was when I was in grad school at Illinois State. I was tasked with being the teacher's aide and teaching a few courses, undergrad courses. And one of those was a sophomore, junior level biology course. Right, so it's a fairly difficult class. First exam comes around, and I'm collecting my papers to read and start reviewing them that night, and come across not one, not two, but 6 out of my class of 20 that couldn't write a complete sentence. Not one, actually. There was 6 full papers. These were at least 3 pages long. Not a single complete sentence in the entire thing. And the one that my most classic example, which I can probably track down again, would be fun to read on air. Missed a verb. You missed using a verb in the first 4 sentences of the paper. Not one single verb, 4 sentences, or 4 attempts at sentences. This is a junior. He was a junior at university and couldn't write a sentence.
Well, and here's the deal.
Petrifying.
As articulate as I am,
He graduated
Andy, if you
too, by the
asked
way.
me, the guy graduated?
Oh, yeah.
If you asked me if I could do, you know how they used to make you go to the board and do those diagram a sentence?
Yeah.
There's no way I could diagram a sentence. Yet I consider myself a pretty decent writer. I can speak very clearly. But I think, like Carlos, I had a great memory at some point in my life. And then through continuing that study at home, which is your mother correcting you over and over and over again. I had a mother who she would say between the A and the T, and I was like, what does that mean? Where are you at between the A and the T? I had a grandmother who did that. And what I'm saying is, if we don't extend, and you hear all these things about pre-K is now the most important thing that you can do, but I don't know why things have to be so regimented in terms of treating people the same and then spitting them out the same. Whereas I don't know, and here at Archway, I hope that we can have an 8-year-old next to a 13-year-old. Because I get the whole sexualization of it, and I get how you don't want kids exposed at certain ages. Obviously, I get that. But if we can let kids who go see a cartoon, who at that point you don't know need to see the preview that is up there because it may be geared towards a 12-year-old, the reality is, why can't we do that in our education system? Why not attempt to move the masses around? And so I would love, if I made any difference in the world, to take something like that and say to someone who is in charge, why do 5-year-olds always need to go to school with 5-year-olds?
Yeah, well, and we talked a little bit about standardization in education, in the last podcast too, but the trick here too is it comes back around to that almighty dollar, right? It all comes back to the dollar. And what I found as I delved into why I had these kids that couldn't write a sentence in university and drilled back, and then I spent a bunch of time in high schools and even grade schools. And what I found out was that essentially these kids had learned that the system would push them through anyway.
Exactly.
Right? And why do
but if
hard
we're going to
work?
push kids through that anyways, why not break the system up and say, if you're going to do this anyways, then just break it up and let 7-year-olds go to school with 5-year-olds in the same classroom.
Because then they have to hire more teachers.
You think that you do?
They
Yeah,
push them
that's
through
exactly what
because they have to keep the numbers up in order to maintain whatever monies they get to the school. Yeah. And so when those numbers drop below, then not only do they get a bad grade, but they also get less money.
So here's an example from a year I was teaching in the high schools, and I was teaching a computer applications course, which was a mandatory freshman course to graduate. Every freshman had to take it. Every freshman had to pass it. I had about 5 students who didn't do any work, 0 work, not a single didn't turn in a single assignment the entire year, meaning they were holding around a 7% in the class. Now ask me if they passed.
I'm assuming they did.
They did, right? And of course, I'm the naive young teacher going, nope, you're not going to make it. And they're like, yes, I am. And sure enough, come the end of the year, administration says, no, they've got to go on, right? Because next year, you're already at max capacity teaching this class, right? We would have to hire another teacher to teach computer applications, and we'd have to find another classroom to put that in, and we can't have more than this number of students in there, and we have that many freshmen coming in that need to take this class. So the only way we can get them through is to just say, well, we tried, and move, and that is not education.
Well, I think college has turned into that thing that the degree now is the diploma of yesterday for people having decent jobs. But even in that, I think that college is no more now than just to say that when you graduate, you have $40,000 or $50,000 that you owe to somebody, and a sheet of paper that costs that much. Not necessarily that you're going to get a decent or legitimate education, but that you have this paper now, which validates saying that you went further than just high school just to get a decent job, along with the experience I guess you have to acquire as well. But big picture, like I said, they're pumping them through each year. And the only thing most of the kids have to show for it is that they are that much more in debt, whether physically or through.
Well, I don't buy the whole thing about the fact that all they have to show for it, but certainly I buy the fact that it's not you treat it as an investment in this country. Because when I make an investment in a property, the tax code allows me to depreciate that investment, which means that it's a depreciable asset that I'm going to continue to have to repair and move into from a perspective of having ownership of. And what I think the more on the sidebar, not disagreeing with you, but on the sidebar of that is certain perspectives are truly where we are at, frankly speaking. And I think the certain perspective here is that I find that because the kids and the young adults that are making that investment fundamentally don't gather what is the return. So if it's looked on the balance sheet as an expense when you're running a business, it's looked on the side of the profit and loss as an expense. But if it's looked on as an investment, you're actually putting that on the asset side, even if it has debt associated with it.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that until you actually put education in this country on the investment side to have a certain amount of return, then you're never going to see return to society.
But I think that they with that, I think back to the stats on how many kids come out of college and get the job that they have their major in. And from what I understand, those stats are really low.
Really low.
Well, I think the retention rate at UTC, if I'm not mistaken, and the sad reality is we have lost a huge advocate here in Chattanooga because the Ox Center did a lot of research analysis that spit back out what is the public investment doing for our community. And one of the things they realized, and I think the last article I saw, and God only knows what, Chattanooga Times Free Press and how they're monetizing, because they're an antiquated platform as well and probably doing everything they can to keep the lights on over there. The reality is that I think it was like 62% retention rate after the first year at UTC.
62%.
I mean, I think it's far less than that after the second year, and then it starts to plateau, and then you see those kids that are going for some sort of, upper management direction or human resources.
Business management, what is it, poli-sci, stuff like that.
Engineering,
general.
All generally attached to the insurance world of save and protect, because that's where it comes down to save them from themselves, but we get to keep the money. Because obviously none of us, we've established to this day, have ever gotten an insurance deck page that said, oh, by the way, we've lowered your rates this year.
Congratulations. You've
But
made
again,
it.
that's private taxation because a lot of that is regulated by the state. All of it is regulated by the state, frankly. And the state is basically starting to tap into those resources to be able to try to make money. It's the only thing that I can fundamentally understand why people are sitting on their hands with these southern states that are issuing millions upon millions of dollars of bond debt to build stadiums, to bring these 100,000 people in, to sell them Coca-Cola and popcorn, but more importantly, to sell the advertisers. And the kids playing don't have a clue that this is going on.
Yeah, that they're not the center of the tension.
They think that they're the center of attention. They think that there's some opportunity that's going to happen, and the opportunity is right then. Today, on this day, we established June 24th. I met the number one NCAA female tennis player today. And I said to her, and she's an economics major at the UNC Chapel Hill, a well-regarded school. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed about her is the same thing I noticed about all of these athletes. She had all of the brands on her that basically give her the ability to not have to pay for her clothing. But they weren't Tar Heel brands. I'm sure she wears Tar Heel brands. They were Nike brands. So it's almost like the Tar Heel guys and the Georgia Dogs and the Tennessee Volunteers. Those people are, you might as well say, the Nike Tennesseans.
Adidas or whoever they were.
The Adidas Tar Heels. I mean, North Carolina. Because the reality is those guys are owned by the deal, and then they're perpetrating the fraud on the kids who are coming in those arenas thinking that there's any opportunity there for them and for their families. And that's really the truth. Until you see that break open, and I wish to God someone would listen to me and send me an NCAA or a Tennessee scholarship, because I guarantee the scholarship is not the same for a football player as it is for a golf player or some other sport that's not totally monetized.
Even for academic.
Well, in academics, certainly, they closed the loophole with that Dole Act. I think it was the last bipartisan act that ever got instituted. I think it was 1982. Bob Dole and another, so he's a Republican and a Democrat, they sponsored a bill that basically said that if you go on a university campus doing research and you discover a cure for cancer, that institution owns that. Exactly. You have no right to that.
Well, and I say that because big picture, the fundamentals of a scholarship should be you maintain this grade point average and you're fine. We're going to take care of you as long as you maintain this. But for athletes, not only do they have to maintain a grade point average, but they have to perform to a certain level.
And where's the fiduciary responsibility, which means trust? Fiduciary means trust. For those of you out there who don't know what that word means, it means trust. Where is the fiduciary responsibility of that university's leadership for those children and those kids that are running their hearts out, and they are chasing a carrot they will never take a bite of? Never.
But like you said, with the academic student, if they come up with the cure for cancer or herpes simplex 12, I don't know, something.
Yeah.
It belongs to the school, you know. So this could be
and
$1 billion.
And the school's going to monetize it.
This could be some $1 billion discovery that this kid has just pretty much given. What was the movie Weird Science? When they
when he exploded the popcorn.
They made the laser or whatever, and they were getting ready to sell off to the military. And the whole thing was the professor was trying to get them to go ahead and finish the project because they had a deadline they had to meet for the military. And the kid was not cut into the deal at all, other than you'll get an A.
Yeah. But here's the funny thing about that movie is that most people who watched that movie just thought that was probably exploding popcorn because they didn't know what the movie was trying to tell you without actually telling you. I always tell people, can you imagine what it would have been like to be William Shakespeare and why he had to invent his own language to be able to talk to people in a way that wouldn't get his head cut off? Because that's what they did back then. Mm-hmm. So can you imagine when you hear people talking about Afghanis and Iraqis and Iranians, can you imagine the good people over there that are trying to get the word out? And if they even so much as get taken an ounce of the wrong way
So
is off with the head.
Queen of Hearts is the Queen of Diamonds.
I mean, it's like when I used to watch Monty Python. Yeah, no doubt. And if I watch Monty Python, I'm like, what the hell's this guy trying to say to me? And the reality is that it just goes back into that system of, are there more people completely satisfied with the way things are? Like grade school is K through 6 or K through 5 or K through 4. Why can't it just be that people go from A to Z or go 1.2, 1.8, and those classes are a different way of thinking about it? I mean, as much as we want to sit here and say that we love the fact that there are people that with pretty progressive ideas, the simplest way to do the education in this country or in this community is just simply to change the numbers. That's what algebra was all about. That there were many different ways to get to 4. And so if you put that dot there, you could get to 4, just depending on how far down the rabbit hole you wanted to go. And I think that's what the problem is. They don't take their own advice. These teachers keep going and accepting the way it is, and they don't get together and say, we're not going to teach like this anymore. We have teachers that believe that this is the way that we should teach, and we should stop doing it by such archaic terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Even, and I'm not even criticizing this whole 2.0 initiative, but they couldn't even say 2.2.
You know, then on the other side of the spectrum, you'd have well, you can't keep my kid back. You can't keep my kid in 1.1 when he's
2.8.
When his friend, the same age, is 2.8. Like, no way, you're out.
That's the thing, though.
Or on the worst, this is the one I find way worse, is what we're finding now, putting our youngins through, the lower level school, is how many parents I've talked to, they're like, yeah, we're going to keep our kid out of kindergarten an extra year so that they're bigger for football in high school. Right? Yeah, so they're the oldest in the class, right? Because then they're going to get a scholarship and play pro ball. I'm not kidding you. This conversation has happened between Heather and I at least 8 times in the last year. I'm keeping my kid back.
That's the thing,
so they can be better at sports.
Is that big picture? We're all different. You're going to be more savvy in certain aspects than I'm going to be. I'm going to be more on something than you. For instance, in my profession, the lieutenant of the apparatus. The lieutenant of the apparatus runs the pump panel. The pump panel is what gets the water from the tank in the engine or from the hydrant on the street to the end of the nozzle that the firefighter's holding. But now you have some lieutenants or operators that can go out and they can push every button necessary to get that water to that nozzle. And then you have some that understand that when I push this button, I'm actually triggering this mechanism to do this, or when I'm pulling this lever, it's opening this flap to do that. And they understand what's going on, not just what they're doing, but what's going on behind the pump panel that's making this happen. And I would venture to say that teachers would be the same way. You have some that love math or algebra, and they're going to sit and they can do X's and quotes and commas and everything else all day long, and they love it. They sleep with this stuff. And then some that just do it just to get a check. And in that, the person that loves the subject more is going to be more enthused about teaching it to the kids, to where the person that's just doing it for a check is just, this is what it is, this is how it goes, and this is what you get.
Well, and the thing that you're establishing is that you have different degrees and levels in which people do things, and you hope across the board that it's not absolute in anything, because that's what we hope for. I mean, I shoot and strive for 60% of the time, I'm hopefully doing things the way that I should do things, and 40% of the time, I'm learning how to up that number the older I get. But the simple fact of the matter is, and I basically am not shy about saying this, the older folks in this country, as they begin to get older, exude the way that they talk about rich people. Is the first generation makes it, the second generation spends it, the third generation loses it. And the loss is in the lack of investment.
Exactly.
Because then basically all the assumptions are that you, like, if I hear it once, I hear it all the time. What are they going to do with that money, buddy? If we give those kids that money, you know they won't say the N-word, and we can go all to N degree about that, because that establishes class. They are poor people. They do not know what retaliatory discharge means. They do not know what loss of consortium means, because the black people in this country and immigrants and females, we are all first-year entrepreneurs, because most of the people that did business in this country prior to 1960 were old white men. And in this, what the 60s did is there was a revolution that said, we're not going to do it your way. Your way is to contain and control. Mm-hmm. We're going to open up the avenue of thought, and we're going to take the risk. And yes, if you look back on certain things that happened, I would have never wanted to go to Woodstock even back then, because I'm not a join the crowd kind of person. And so I think that's what we're trying to establish with Archway, is with our different degrees and different perspectives. You certainly have had a much, Carlos, bigger perspective when it came to working your way up by blocks being open. You, Andy, basically went at it from a position of coaching led to product placement, led to retail establishment, because it made sense.
Yep.
It made sense that it's exactly why the Birmingham or the Alabama high school coaches they are six figures. There's coaches in the state of Alabama, high school coaches, making $200,000 a year.
I'm in the wrong business.
Because they know that they have to keep the secret. They can't tell the kids that they are looked at as this tradable commodity at a fixed cost. And those kids and their parents are delusional to think that those kids will ever get a taste of that carrot. The people eating the carrot are the people at the top.
Well, it's like I said on the first podcast, you got to see where these people are coming from, and if they even care about who's getting over on them. You know, I've been just say that some realize that, okay, I'm being used right now, but wherever they're coming from is just that bad to where they don't even care. It's a way out. Well,
that's why I always said if I could have rebranded Black Lives Have Value, Black Lives Matter, if they'd have called Michele Peterson and said, what do you think, Michele? I would have said all lives have value, because I would never use the matter part, because then the degrees means a defensiveness versus just the sad part about it is that most people, women included, gays included, everything else, just want to feel like they belong. And I've never needed to feel like I belong.
But there's money and attention in separation. The guy up in Polk County is proving that right now. The guy with the billboard.
Oh, my word.
Make America white again.
But what does that mean, make America white again?
It's the trigger.
Well, of course I know he can just get the attention because he says something so garish.
And that's what he wants. It's the same thing with Trump. The things that he says that are outlandish or whatever, he's saying those things knowing that...
They're just lazy, buddy.
Knowing that they're going to get the attention, though. It's a cheap, easy way...
Those people are lazy.
It's a cheap, easy way to get the attention.
Donald Trump is lazy.
He may be, but he's outsmarting the multitude. He's drawing them in hand over fist over what he's saying.
But it takes a lot of time and energy to put thought in things where you don't segment a certain group. And yes, you can't please everyone.
No.
But the reality is you can certainly stand up in front of people and say, look, somebody's got to be asking themselves, why are we issuing all this debt in this country, which that's why you can't bankrupt student loans, is because it's public debt. It's being guaranteed by the good faith of the United States dollar.
Yep.
And so if you say to someone you can bankrupt it, then that means your country is bankrupt, because it's the opposite of the Department of Defense. It's a Department of Offense saying, go get yourselves an equity understanding to level the playing field once you get out into the world of business. It's what everybody saw when they came out of Carnegie times and all the things that happened back then with the colluded monopolies that were occurring, is that if we can do anything in this country, we can give the people the ability to almost instantaneously level the playing field through a certain vernacular that becomes the standard. And that's why I say the English language in this country is the caste system that everybody is looking for. They can't figure it out, but it is. Because you will never, ever be able to keep your money, even if you go out and make millions. It's been proven time and time again. If you can't read a contract and see within that contract that someone is picking your pocket. Because until it's in writing and it's right there in front of you and you know what that word means, you won't be able to hold on to your dollar. I guarantee you all day long that there have been very few people who have been as successful as most NFL players who make millions upon millions of dollars. And if they cannot read their own contract and read their own balance sheet and read their own income, P&L, profit and loss statement, and that's what I said to that crack dealer. And it's what I'm saying right now to every gang member in East Chattanooga. You will forevermore be taken advantage of. It doesn't matter if you make $10,000 a day. I will pick your pocket because I know one thing you don't know, which is I'm smarter in the understanding of English, and I can put that out there and tempt you to spend more money than you ever wanted to because you don't have any value. Because that street pharmaceutical you're slinging isn't going into anything that can turn around and give you a return. It's only transactional. So if you make $10,000 today and spend $8,000 tomorrow on whatever you think, then that's short-term investment versus the risk that you took. Doesn't pay anything 10 years from now, and in fact, it quite possibly could take away your freedom.
It could. It's the difference. We were just talking earlier in private conversation. It's the difference in living for today versus living for tomorrow. Most of your big thinkers and your major corporations, they live on the aspect of what's going to be the next thing. When I was giving an example of a car, the 2017s will come out mid-2000 this year, 16. But that means that car has been developed, it's been tested, it's been passed, it's failed here, and it's gone through all of the steps or whatever to get it to where it's an actual vehicle. But that was planning done years ago. And we sit and wait for that vehicle to come out. What are the new 2017s, F-150 or Dodge 1500s? We're living for today. But like you said, if you thought down the line, if you thought about your retirement, if you thought about a pension, if you thought about just something that would make a nice nest egg that could make you okay to where you could invest in this or you purchase this item and down the road you could put it back in or turn it back in for more, then there will be a better understanding of seeing the bigger picture. But a lot of people, and blacks, whites, whoever, when they live for fashion, when they live for status, when they live for class, they're living for today and not necessarily the big picture down the road.
Yeah, or even back to the contract discussion, Michele, you were mentioning, it's like not thinking big picture, not thinking long term, not being able to read your own contract. You've got manager so and so or coach going, oh yeah. This is just
it's just a formality.
Just sign it.
It's just a formality, brother.
We do these things every day. Just sign right
terms.
here.
You know, legal terms.
Legal terms.
You know, Mama, we gonna take care of him.
Yeah.
We got you.
Yeah. We know.
He gonna come up here in the University of Tennessee, the volunteers. We gonna take care of him. Yeah, we gonna put him. You know, Peyton Manning was there. You know, Peyton Manning, he was there, and you know, he now owns like 12 Papa John's.
Yeah.
You know, they give us free pizza all the time.
But it said, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with Tupac and Suge Knight. It said that whenever Tupac went to death row, he was never really paid in actual monies. He's paid in gifts. So whenever he would come and ask about where his albums were, as far as billboards or sales and stuff like that, Suge would just give him keys to a Bentley or a house, you know, something that was he could hold and not necessarily cash in for value.
Wow.
Well, and I'm sure Suge Knight, being the opportunist that he was, also said, and you don't have to pay income tax on this. because that may have been at the beginning.
Looking out for you.
Exactly.
It's always going to be sold. Even here at Archway, we don't want to be sycophants. We don't want to say, but that, oh, we're looking out for your best interest. Like when I said to Yolanda Putman, when she was like, you're going to go over there and stand up for people, I said, no, I'm going to go over there and teach people how to stand up for themselves. Because if people don't stand up for themselves and they have no value, it's done. I can exploit that all day long.
Teach them that they have legs.
Do you have a brain when you go, and do you have an understanding of valuations when it comes to a certain investment you're making? So I was that kid that was always want to get faster, because as I established the first time we did this, I knew I was going to be on the court and the field. I knew I was going to be plowing and hoeing the field because I was a woman. I knew that there was an opportunity for me to make that plow and make a difference, because that was locked up. And I got lucky that some young guy or some older guy thought me entertaining enough to say, hey, gal, you need to stop all this institutional stuff, because we got that locked down. We know everybody that's moving everything. And that's why when people get so upset that they want to make America white again, it's because they're losing out on the marketplace. Yeah. And it's because they can't figure out what I already know, which is when they click Google, I'm going to pick their pocket every single day, because I can write a message that makes me look like them. And then they send me their money and they have no clue that I look the way I do and I think the way I do. And I think diversification keeps the marketplace cancer away. If you are diversified enough, then yes, somebody might do something stupid that day, and that somebody might be black. But if at the heart of it you're a bigot to begin with, then, and you could be even black. This is the part of the equation that I keep getting at, which is that there's nothing worse in life than self-hate. It's what I posted on the Frankly Speaking page last week. And I was a self-hater because I was gay. And I know that that happens to people where they begin. So in high school, I'd be like, I didn't want to belong to the gay club. I didn't want to belong to the lesbian club. Because I hated myself for being that way, because that's what society told me and my grandmother told me.
Well, we grew up trying to fit in. The whole thing is trying to figure out who you are and where do you fit in. And I'm like you. I've been a part of a couple of organizations or whatever, and going into it, I was all like excited, like, you know, this is really about to happen. But once I got in, it was like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
And it wasn't as thrilling as I had put it up to be coming into it, because I guess I had made it, but it didn't pay. Most times I had to pay to be a part.
Yeah.
You know, I had to follow.
Isn't that the kind of incestuous thing about unions? You like pay people to look out for your best interest.
Yeah. You got to pay to be a part. Then you have to perform or operate according to their standards or their protocols or whatever. And so it's like paying. It's like paying to volunteer into slavery. It's like, I'm gonna give you $10,000 to be your slave. And I've just never like that, you know, and it took me a while to realize that, but I'm just not good with social groups. I have friends, I have acquaintances, and I have people that I go back and forth with, but as far as being a part of a lambda or whatever, that's just not been my thing. I work a lot better alone in my own environment.
And certainly, Carlos, what you're saying rings very true to my heart, and I'm here seeing Andy shake his head. But at the same time, we aren't 18 again, and I know what happens within those arenas, and it's not all bad either.
No.
But I think that if we don't get to a place where the blacks are over here and the whites are over there and the Mexicans are over there and all the things that we try to say, then we have a roadmap, which is you can look at those states up north that have protected, they have over-regulated and over-insured everything through unions and other things. And yet their rate of and their young people being addicted to heroin and narcotics is exploding, because what it boils down to is when you create an artificial construct, then you have artificial stagnation within it. And then the people that are not able to move in any direction but to stand still are going to get so bored that their brain is going to begin to do things that most people wouldn't think would happen. And my grandmother, the one that said the world is coming to an end because there's she was speaking about the rapture and all the things that were happening. And I said to her, why do you think the rapture is happening? And she said, because men are sleeping with men and women are sleeping with women. And here I am, a gay person who loves this person more than life itself. And she didn't come from a position of hate. She came from a position of fear. Yeah. And I know that there is a fine line once someone reaches their threshold. So I could forgive her by the fact that she didn't even know that her granddaughter was sitting there and had always been a person that was gay. Always. I knew early on that I was. And the shame and the blame could have been easier, but I chose the shame and the guilt.
But it's not that uncommon from her point of view. To be the prisoner and the warden inside your own head. Because growing up in a religious area, the South, the belt buckle of the South or whatever, it's certain things are put out there. Like back in the 80s when I was a kid, certain things you heard about homosexuality, you don't hear anymore because those fears and taboos about it have all gone by the wayside. I've never seen so many interracial couples in my life. Certainly growing up, you didn't see as many, but now it's a great thing. I think that we should all one day just turn into this big mixed race of just Irish, African, Scottish, Australian, whatever, and just let that be it. But in that, the gates are starting to open, the wardens are starting to unlock the gates or whatever in our own minds, and we're starting to see that, you know, some of these things that we feared growing up that were put in front of us to be scared of aren't really all that bad.
But the things that we were told to be scared of, ironically, were put in place to protect us.
Perspective.
Because the way that it protects us is it keeps us from having to experience new things, and not experiencing new things means that you're safe, because what worked yesterday works today, works tomorrow. And these generations of people that have that train of thought are now suffering. And you can look at it up north. You can see the chronic disease happening within their society where they have created these artificial constructs similar to what you're talking about with the fire department, where the marketplace itself is inaccessible to new thought because they're waiting for the block to come open, because they have over-legislated their marketplace. And that's where Tennessee is, and frankly, Alabama, and now it needs to happen at the NCAA. Those guys need to break free the Tennessees and the Alabamas, because everybody else who has some opinion about this that isn't jaded with what are they going to do with money anyways? They're going to all waste it. They're going to buy weed and all those things that
Cadillacs.
People say. Cadillac. I mean, Cadillac going to have a surge, right? That's what everybody says.
That's what Dave Chappelle said.
I mean, yeah. And my feeling is if the coaches don't see that they already have a roadmap, and that roadmap is up north. And up north, it's why you have certain areas of New York City that are still populated by the same people from which they came from. Chinatown. Harlem. Irish, the
Little Italy.
Pubs, Little Italy. Mm-hmm. And the simple fact of the matter is the thriving community up there that's really bringing value is Brooklyn. Because it doesn't have a name. And that's what I say when it comes to Hardy. If we could fund anything that I would want to fund from Archway and raise money and do anything, it would be to take that school and turn it into an actual higher learning versus just a school during next summer's program, and let those kids interact without having the stigma of where they are in their certain age group.
But you know what, though? Since we've been sitting here talking, I thought about something that I saw last year, I believe. There's a young lady that participated in the Causeway contest they had to get the money for whatever great idea they had to move society forward. And this lady had a demographic sheet out, and it showed in different colors or whatever which schools were more diverse than others. And it was like inner city schools were like majority black or Spanish, obviously. And then some of your more rural schools or whatever were majority white. But then there were schools like arts and sciences, your Baylors, your Macaulay's, your GPS. They were more diverse, and it showed how these kids performed at higher levels because they had a more diverse surrounding. So,
Well, they had less shackles too, Carlos. I mean, the fact of the matter is most people don't fundamentally get Common Core and don't understand what we're talking about when we talk about a universal type of thought. But ironically, Common Core, from everything that I read, is trying to get people to compartmentalize things so that their one side of their brain doesn't affect the other side of their brain that might release something that happens. So the Common Core questions that I've read make a lot of sense, but you have to be able to understand the phrase that pays, which is, do you know what time it is?
I understand that, but what if at home, right, from that grandmother or that mother that grew up in a majority white or black society, sent their kid to a school that was crazy diverse, right? And everything that parent told them about black people or white people or whoever, this kid is going to school sitting right next to that person and seeing the total opposite. Or seeing that this person is just that,
There's
a person.
an amount of trust there that isn't in the schools that you're talking about that have a majority of black, because I'm not even sure that those kids understand that the value is in the trust. The value is in the fiduciary responsibility as a human being to treat someone with respect, because not what you can get out of them, but because that's how we all operate. That we're going to see each other on the way up, and we're certainly going to see you on the way back down. Because the guy who can't end the sentence of preposition quite possibly might be the guy that's coming in and basically burying me and taking my body. I'm not making an assumption that people who bury bodies can't understand the English language. What I am saying is there's a certain hierarchy within the language itself that has created a caste system. And so it's unfortunate that people who want to make a difference don't fundamentally understand that they are pushing a boulder uphill when it comes to generational knowledge of why is this the way it is. It was done well before the Carlos, the Andy, and the Michelles were around. It was established years ago in a caste system that basically told people immediately where you are from and does your family have any property? I mean, women in this country were property 100 years ago. Hold on, let me jump in here because I know you want to jump in, but I do want to say, I mean, up until 1927, men could not vote in this country or in England unless they made a certain amount of money or were property owners.
Yeah, and the whole thing, as you mentioned, kind of perpetuates itself where these parents or, folks in guidance roles are showcasing that to the next generation, and whether that's, again, English language and here's how I talk, here's how you're going to talk, right? And yet that's just carrying it through rather than what we hear all the time is how we all want our kids to have more than what we have, and yet in this most simplest form, right, you could be doing a massive disservice to that because you're wanting to, I guess, carry on what you've always, the way you've always talked, and it could really be a major problem.
Yes, some traditions are good traditions.
Yeah,
and,
some are good,
and then some are horrible. Was just talking about this the other day to someone, and it's a story that I've heard time and time again, and I may mess it up. But the way the story goes is that this family, when they had the Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner or whatever, they would buy this particular piece of, or part of an animal, piece of meat, and they would cut this piece of meat off put it in the pot, cut a piece of meat off the large piece of meat, put it in the pot, and cook it. Well, generations down the road, this person asked, well, why do we cut this piece of meat off? It's a good piece of meat. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not fat, it's not skin, it's not gristle. It's actual lean meat, and we're cutting it off and throwing it away and putting the rest in the pot to cook. And no one knew in the immediate circle. It was like, we've always done it. Well, the person goes back to one of the elders in the family and asks, well, why do we do this? And the elder says, well, because when we first started having these get-togethers with the family, the pot that we had was too small for that piece of meat. So we would cut meat off and throw it away in order to make the meat fit.
Because nobody could afford a new pot.
And generations go by and nobody questioned it. And so it just became one of those things of tradition.
Yeah.
So again, not all traditions are good traditions.
We're trying to make a new pot around here at Archway.
I want a big pot. I want a big pot.
I don't know if it's going to be a bigger pot, but we're definitely trying to make a new pot around here.
But
that's a very interesting analogy of how it
thought.
can happen. And you don't want to disrespect the people you love.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Because that's the equalizer in most families. It didn't matter who I met. Whenever I met that kid, and I keep repeating this over and over again, I had two kids that they hadn't seen their mothers. I mean, the person who carried them and gave them life, they hadn't laid eyes on those people. One kid hadn't laid eyes. He was 20, 14 years. His mother was in Jamaica. And that was a crazy story, and I won't go into it right now. But still to this day, I bet that kid wants to buy his mother a house. There is some formation of thought that goes into protect mode of what you can't control. And if he could, and the solution was always like, I want to be rich, buddy. And the solution was, if I was just rich, I could bring my mother over here, I could see her more. And yeah, that may be true. But one thing that I said to him is that you may not have anything for your mother to talk about. You may sit in the same house and y'all may not have anything to talk about because you're making an assumption that genetic means and your gene pool means that you don't have anything in common with that person. And I always say I think people go to church, especially if your parent takes you to church, because when the parent begins to get older, as what we're all going through with our parents, certainly my parents are getting older, and we're seeing the decay right in front of us. If my parents would have gone and taken me to church, then I would probably be going to church every single Sunday and not questioning what was being fed me at that moment because my mind would be in the love.
You know what? Funny you say that. I was made to go to church, and my mindset was, well, if I have to go, then why ain't she going? And I always questioned that, and I believe in the extreme being, but I think that I don't see things the way that my mother sees things, or even her mother sees things when it comes to religion. And going back further on that, I came to the realization or found out that when it came to the slaves or whatever, religion was beat into them. And my question lately has been, who did black people pray to or believe in before Christianity
because one could
was?
assume that they didn't pray to the same God and the same mechanism that the white people did, because the white people probably thought their God was superior back then, right? One would think.
They introduced Christianity to the slaves to get them to believe that slavery was the way God wanted it to be, and so
it's acceptable.
And so the crazy thing about that is that you had the slave praying for freedom, and you had the slave owner praying to keep the slave in place and not overthrowing the plantation.
Well, and certainly the word plantation really fits right now. Plantationism is at its height when you look at the NCAA and the sports that happen, and I will continue to spend my time and some of my money reaching out to people who need to understand that they will never get a bite of that carrot. Never. They will never. There are very few people who get fed at that banquet besides the people who own the utensils and the food and the door into that banquet.
Well, what if we could teach the person that uses the word at the end of a sentence that they're being judged for using that ad, and then taught the person that's sitting there judging the person using the ad that just because they used it, where they used it, doesn't make them a lower class of person. Boom.
I would love for that to happen, but the fact is that's a I don't know.
It's a bigger picture than us. Yeah.
I mean, literally. Because in terms of it
Big
not being
dreaming.
legitimate in this country, it's not legitimate until the courts say that it is. And the courts aren't going to do anything that has to do with anything outside of the binary rules that they've put in place to keep the masses separated from one another, and it's win or lose.
But
There's no in between. I don't still understand.
Why does the court have so much power?
I think that the courts in this country are so stagnated through the artificial construct called insurance, and now you're finding that happening in terms of investment and decay of marketplaces, because Budweiser is now linking up with Miller. Comcast almost bought Time Warner. I mean, and that deal only fell through because another big fish came in and put the stops on that, which is called Charter.
But
And those guys work behind the scenes.
What gives the court so much power? We give the court power. So if we took the power back, then that would take the power from the court. If we said, okay, this is how it's going to be.
How you're talking redeveloping government.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Carl.
It's a realization of what the government is. The government works for us.
I'd just
We
be
don't work for the
satisfied if
government.
we could get Hardy Elementary School not to put people on the same grades based on their age.
I think it's bigger than Hardy. I think that's a lot
How
bigger than
much is
Hardy.
Hardy's budget? Can we buy a public school?
I don't think so. We could probably start a charter.
How much is Hardy's school budget? Can we know that by the time we get here next Wednesday?
I think we can dig
Probably.
into it. I think we can dig into it.
You think that principal would know that budget over there?
It should be public record.
Yeah.
So basically, if Hardy's budget to institute an elementary school, it's the safety net, right? If they go rogue, then they can't join back in. I guess there's some absolutism.
But you still have a curriculum to keep up.
Oh, I mean, we would use some of the curriculum. I think it'd be funny.
Some of it.
I think what would be
that's how it
funny
goes.
is to change that. I mean, it's what Elaine Swafford's trying to do at the Girls Leadership Academy.
Keyword, trying to do. She still has a curriculum to follow.
Well, but I get the impression, and I don't know Elaine very well, but I get the impression that she is someone who gets the understanding that life happens in inches.
She actually
she
cares.
may be planting a tree, as we said before, that she'll never see the shade of.
She actually cares, and that's the difference. And I don't know how true it is. Maybe we can find this out too. But a lot of teachers, they come out of college, if they go and work in a school in an urban area or a troubled school for so many years or whatever, the debt's forgiven. And I would want to know first if that's a true statement. Second, how many teachers go just to spend those 5 years and get out of there versus how many go and realize, you know what, I'm really making a difference in someone's life here. It may be this area, but this is where I fit, and actually stay and continue to teach in that area.
I think that we've been here an hour and a half, Friday, June 24th. This is our third
Talking about insurance and religion
In
and
school.
a show about
government
nothing. It sure does
organization.
talk about a lot of something, but we may be talking to ourselves. I certainly think that all these leaders in this country are preaching to the choir, and the reality is that most people in this community don't know the gold mine that they're sitting on. I think
I'd agree.
the thing that Till over at Glass House Collective is trying to show people is that if we just simply light the streets, you get a different perspective. And I think by the fact that they got that grant and started putting lights, so when I drive down Glass Street now, this part of the street is well lit. It makes me feel very comfortable. And we've got a lot of goals that we can attain to, but one of the things that we want to most definitely put out is that come Monday, and I'm going to do this Monday because we've been talking about we need to get this donut thing sewed up.
Yes.
You know, we need to get the kids who want to come brand the donut with Barbara Cox. So I'm going to reach out to Barbara Monday morning, go see her, and hopefully nail down that we're going to name that donut contest is going to begin on July 5th. I gave myself a month from June 5th when we established it, and we're almost there. And so join us again. This is, frankly speaking, talking about Archway and just about anything else that we could think of.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Bye.
Great conversation.